I'm Nima Rajan. Canada has joined the U.S., the U.K., and 20 other countries in a historic deal. The agreement is to stop new direct public finance for coal, oil, and gas development by the end of 2022. The deal, signed at the COP26 climate meeting in Glasgow, Scotland, also promises more emphasis on financing renewable energy. The Government of Canada says it has yet to define the scope of the new policy. The deal allows for continued finance of fossil fuels in limited circumstances that are consistent with international climate goals. The 24 signatories say they will encourage other governments, as well as their export credit agencies and public finance institutions, to implement similar commitments. The Conservative opposition is calling on the Liberals to give urgent funding to safe houses in Kabul that are providing refuge to 1,700 Afghans. The safe houses are set to close on Friday. This because the money keeping them open will run out. That could leave occupants at the mercy of Afghanistan's new Taliban rulers who took power this summer. Veterans groups previously raised around $2 million in private donations. They say they will need an additional $5 million to keep the safe houses open after Friday. A record spending surge in Canadian health care is expected to reach $308 billion in 2021 alone. It works out to about $8,000 per Canadian. The Canadian Institute for Health Information projects that health spending increased 12.8% between 2019 and 2020. That's more than triple the average annual growth rate seen from 2015 to 2019, which was approximately 4% per year. Provinces and territories have asked the federal government to take on a larger share of health spending. The president of Canada's Treasury Board says 95.3% of federal public servants have been fully vaccinated so far against COVID-19. Mona Fortier says out of the 268,000 core federal employees, another 2.7% have been partially immunized. This while 1.2% are requesting exemptions, which are being assessed. She says 0.5% of public servants have declared they are not vaccinated, and 0.3% have not declared their status, which they were supposed to do by October 29th. Yukon's Premier has announced a vaccine mandate for government employees. This is including frontline workers in the healthcare system and teachers. But the territory has not yet determined any consequences for those who refuse to comply. Premier Sandy Silver said yesterday that employees must get their first vaccine dose by November 30th and be fully vaccinated by January 30th. Ontario and Quebec are changing course on COVID-19 vaccine mandates for hospital workers. Both provinces are allowing those who are not vaccinated to get frequent testing. Ontario Premier Doug Ford says input from hospitals and other stakeholders led him to conclude that high vaccination rates and strong infection control measures mean hospitals are safe and can manage outbreaks. Quebec's health minister says his province's plan to suspend unvaccinated workers on November 15th would have caused a cut in services and burdened existing staff. Sunken areas of major cities like Vancouver and Montreal could become inundated with floods over the next 80 years, according to new research. Maps created by an engineering professor from the University of Western Ontario distill almost 150,000 reference documents. The maps, which show flood impacts on a countrywide scale in a standardized way, identify areas where rivers are most likely to overflow. British Columbia's Environment Minister says the province expects to make constant adjustments to its climate action plan as research and technology advance. George Heyman made the statement yesterday during a teleconference from the UN Climate Summit in Scotland. This was where he was invited to discuss the climate crisis with other government leaders. Manitoba's Advocate for Children and Youth has issued a report on the untimely and tragic deaths of 45 boys. The boys, mostly Indigenous, were between 12 and 17 years old and died between 2009 and 2018. The acting advocate, Ainsley Crone, says most of the boys experienced neglect and witnessed substance abuse and violence at home. The report recommends Manitoba develop culturally appropriate approaches for parents and in schools. Prince Edward Island is raising its minimum wage. Officials have announced a 70-cent increase. Starting April 1st, the minimum wage will be increased to $13.70 an hour. This is up from the current rate of less than $13 an hour. The province's Employment Standards Board says there is a possibility it may recommend a $15 an hour wage minimum to the PEI government. We'll be right back. Defense Minister Anita Anand says the federal government has accepted in full a call by retired Supreme Court Justice Louis Arbour. This for the transfer of all criminal cases involving allegations of sexual misconduct in the military to civilian authorities. The surprise announcement came shortly after Ms. Arbour's recommendation. The former judge and UN High Commissioner for Human Rights made it last month in a letter written to Ms. Anand's predecessor, Harjit Sajjan. Ms. Arbour is the second retired Supreme Court judge to have called for the military to transfer criminal cases involving sexual misconduct to civilian authorities. Elections Canada is investigating to see if errors cost Indigenous communities across Canada their right to vote on September 20th. First Nations in the Ontario riding of Kenora were denied the ability to vote on polling day, and the agency wants to know if more communities were affected. 3 fly-in First Nations communities in Kenora, including Pikangikum, Poplar Hill, and Cat Lake, had no polling stations on federal election day. Business leaders say air travel has become out of reach for many Canadians. This because of a government rule requiring a negative COVID-19 test upon return. Canadian Chamber of Commerce President Perrin Beatty says it makes no sense for every traveler coming into Canada to undergo a COVID test. He says that instead, Canada should introduce target measures for travelers going to regions where vaccination rates may be low or where COVID-19 cases are surging. BC Premier John Horgan has confirmed that a growth in his throat is malignant. But he also says his prognosis is good and he expects to make a full recovery after radiation therapy. His radiation will begin in about 2 weeks and will last throughout next month. A biopsy was performed last week after the growth was located when Mr. Horgan reported a lump in his neck. Mr. Horgan says he will participate virtually in briefings, cabinet meetings, and other important gatherings. Air Canada's president and CEO is apologizing. This for comments he made which downplayed the importance of him learning French. Michael Rousseau now says he is committed to improving his French, and he did not mean any disrespect to Quebecers. At a speech to the Chamber of Commerce of Metropolitan Montreal on Monday, made almost entirely in English, Mr. Rousseau told reporters he didn't have time to learn French. Premier François Legault demanded that he apologize. At the COP26 climate conference today in Scotland, Mr. Legault said Air Canada should take time to consider whether Mr. Rousseau should be allowed to continue in his post. Ontario is trumpeting plans to spend billions of dollars on highways and bridge repairs in its fall economic statement. Finance Minister Peter Bethlen-Falvey says the government is committed to funding proposed highways to save commuters time. The government hasn't said how much it will spend on the controversial Highway 413 project, which advocates fear will threaten the environment. A Canadian expert says the cyber attack that knocked down Newfoundland and Labrador's healthcare data centers is the worst in Canadian history. Beauceron security head David Shipley says similar attacks have targeted individual hospitals or more general government services in the country. But the consequences for human health makes the Newfoundland and Labrador situation stand out. A similar attack took out Ireland's healthcare system in May, and Dublin-based security expert Brian Honan says increasing frequency and severity of these incidents is a sign that other countries need to take the security risk seriously. Aqua Bounty has confirmed genetically modified salmon harvested from its plants in Prince Edward Island is for the first time being sold in Canada. The company's third quarter results show that it harvested 84 metric tons of the salmon from its plants in PEI and Indiana in the July to September period. And it says weekly output is, quote, ramping up steadily. Aqua Bounty says in an email that all of the fish grown in PEI were sold in Canada through seafood distributors. But it says the company is not providing any further details. Health Canada is allowing the genetically modified salmon to be sold without labeling, a decision that has been criticized by multiple environmental groups. A study by two St. Francis Xavier University researchers says the province of Nova Scotia has been getting steadily warmer in the past 40 years, particularly in the last 2 decades. The data shows average temperatures in the province rose notably since 1998. This when compared to the normal temperatures between 1961 and 1990. All right, we've got international news on the way. The Bank of England surprises by keeping interest rates steady. Ethiopia marks 1 year of conflict in its Tigray war, and OPEC Plus keeps to cautious monthly oil production increases. We'll have these stories and more when we come back from break. But first, we take a look at Tesla, Hertz, and market disruption. Stay tuned. Tesla stocks tumbled approximately 3% during Tuesday's trading session. This came after Tesla founder Elon Musk doubted a potential deal with car rental giant Hertz on Twitter. The deal to supply 100,000 Tesla Model 3 electric vehicles to Hertz by the end of 2022 was announced last week. The $4.2 billion deal is being called the biggest rental car order for electric vehicles ever. The announcement propelled the company's market capitalization to $1 trillion for the first time. Stock prices later fell, though, after Mr. Musk revealed that no contract had been signed. However, the $1 trillion valuation is the latest indication of how Tesla continues to disrupt the automotive market. Well, joining us now to provide some insight behind disruptive companies just like Tesla is Brendan Caldwell, Director of Caldwell Securities Limited. Brendan, welcome back to Forum Daily.
So great to be here, Nima. Thank you.
So what exactly are disruptive companies, Brendan?
Well, for those of us that are around any length of time, like the last 5 years, but even longer, you've seen new technologies replace the way that business has always been done for a very long time. So whether it's the traditional car companies like General Motors and Chev, all of a sudden the hot new thing are these electric car companies, or whether it's a company like Hertz, where you've got the business of renting cars. I mean, you go to a new town, you rent a car, you drive, you return the car, of being outmaneuvered by Uber, which is a new way of getting around. And of course, that's disrupted the taxi business as well. So there's been an awful lot just in the transportation area that has disrupted the way things have always been done.
And considering electric vehicles themselves, we know this partnership is being called one of the biggest in the EV industry ever. But who are the real winners from these kinds of disruptive partnerships between Tesla and Hertz, for example?
Well, normally speaking, and the new technology company, in this case Tesla, is the longer-term winner. For a company like Hertz, which partnered with Uber, 4 or 5 years ago, it's a bit of a lifeline because it gives them relevancy in the new technology. But ultimately, the new technology company, Uber or in this case Tesla, is using the old technology as a platform to leverage themselves into a broader audience. So in this particular case, it's been very good for Hertz. The stock price has gone way up. It's been good for Uber potentially, good for Tesla. But I think ultimately Tesla is going to be the winner because Elon Musk at some point wants to bring in his robo-taxis, which will displace and disrupt both Uber and Hertz.
And it's interesting that Mr. Musk clarified that Hertz received no discount for purchasing so many vehicles. Considering the size of this order, Brendan, why do you think that is?
Well, because, again, Hertz needs this. This is an important deal for Hertz. It helps them more than it helps Elon. It's a nice to have for Tesla, but not a must have. So, and again, 100,000 cars, it seems like a big number, but even for Tesla at the rate that they're going, this is not it may be the largest single order, but it's not large in the grand scheme of the number of cars they're making at this point.
Now, considering the largeness of this deal, Brendan, Tesla's market capitalization was pushed to over $1 trillion following the initial announcement. So what did this $1 trillion figure indicate about Tesla's impact on the automotive industry?
Well, it's big, obviously. It's being valued not as just a car company, but a disruptive technology company. And again, we sometimes have a hard time of thinking about that. There was a woman named Barbara Gray who wrote Secrets of the Amazon. And I'm going to put a shameless plug in for her because it's been very helpful in my own thinking. I even pulled up a couple of her books because we thought of Amazon a decade or more ago as a way of getting books. But books were really just the stepping off point to do something much bigger. And now if we flash forward to the present, Amazon dominates all of retail. So too is Tesla. It's not about electric cars. It's about the technology that'll dominate, to begin with, all of transportation. And then we see where we go from there. So it's not just about making cars, whereas GM and the other car companies are about making cars.
All right, Brendan Caldwell from Caldwell Securities Limited. Always great having you on the show. Thank you again for your time today.
Thank you, Nima, very much.
We'll be back after the break with a look at stories from around the world. The Bank of England surprises by keeping interest rates steady. Ethiopia marks 1 year of conflict in its Tigray war, and OPEC Plus keeps to cautious monthly oil production increases. These stories and more coming back from break, so stay with us. Britain is the first country to grant a conditional authorization to pharmaceutical giant Merck. This for its coronavirus antiviral, which is the first pill shown to successfully treat COVID-19. It's intended to be taken at home twice a day for 5 days by people with mild to moderate COVID-19. An antiviral pill that reduces symptoms and speeds recovery could prove groundbreaking. It could ease caseloads on hospitals. It could also help to curb outbreaks in poorer countries with more fragile health systems. The Bank of England has confounded market expectations and held interest rates steady. The decision to keep the bank's main interest rate at 0.1% was a surprise, given the sharp pickup in inflation in recent months. The rate-setting Monetary Policy Committee panel says there's value in waiting for further information in the labor market following the end of the government salary program. The number of Americans applying for unemployment benefits fell to a fresh pandemic low last week. This is another sign that the job market is healing after last year's coronavirus recession. Jobless claims dropped by 14,000 to 269,000 last week. Overall, 2.1 million Americans were collecting unemployment checks the week of October 23rd. This is down from 7.1 million a year earlier, when the economy was still reeling from the coronavirus pandemic. The head of a World Health Organization regional office says a 53-country region in Europe and Central Asia faces a real threat in the coming weeks. This is due to the potential resurgence of COVID-19. Dr. Hans Kluge said today that COVID case counts are beginning to near record levels again, and that the pace of transmission in the region is of grave concern. He says region-wide, an average of 47% of people are fully vaccinated. The head of a European Parliament delegation on its first official visit to Taiwan says it is high time for the European Union to step up its cooperation with the self-ruled island, which is also claimed by China. 13 lawmakers from the Parliament's Committee on Foreign Interference in Democratic Processes met with Taiwan President Tsai Ing-wen. The visit comes amid growing support for the democratic island. China claims it as part of its territory to be annexed by force if necessary. Lebanon's prime minister has again urged his information minister to step down. This comes amid a diplomatic rift with Saudi Arabia and its Gulf Arab allies that threatens to destabilize the new government. The prime minister says the resignation would help resolve the crisis. He can't dismiss the minister without the approval of 2/3 of his cabinet. He also had stern words for his partners in government, the militant Hezbollah group and its allies. They have rejected calls for the minister to resign. Thousands of Iranians have gathered on the streets of Tehran for the anniversary of the 1979 seizure of the U.S. Embassy. The demonstrators gathered and chanted in the commemoration, which typically draws angry crowds. The embassy takeover triggered a 444-day hostage crisis. This, as well as a break in diplomatic relations, that continues today. Tensions have flared in recent months after Iran's election of a hardline president. Ethiopia is marking a year of war against Tigray forces. The war has killed thousands of people and displaced millions since November 2020. It now threatens to engulf the capital. Rival Tigray forces seized key cities in recent days and linked up with another armed group. The government of Africa's second most populous country has declared a state of emergency. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed called on citizens to rise up and bury the Tigray forces in a Facebook post. Facebook later removed the post for inciting violence. OPEC and allied oil-producing countries have decided to stick with their monthly plan for cautious monthly increases in oil production. This even as prices surge and the global economy is thirsty for fuel. The OPEC Plus alliance is made up of OPEC members led by the Saudis and non-members led by Russia. On Thursday, the group approved an increase in production of 400,000 barrels per day for the month of December. That's in line with a plan to add that amount of oil to the market every month into next year. Nuclear energy is a sticking point at COP26 talks. Critics decry its price tag, the damage caused by nuclear accidents, and radioactive waste. But a growing pro-nuclear camp argues that it's safer on average than nearly any other energy source, and it's low emission. And they say it is the world's best hope of keeping climate change under control. All right, that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. Remember, for more news on demand, you could always visit our website, thenewsforum.ca. I'm Nima Rajan, and this was Forum Daily News. Take care, Canada.